My husband died unexpectedly, leaving behind a 12.8 billion inheritance. But when I went to handle his death papers, the staff told me I wasn't qualified. At that moment, I froze, thinking I must have heard wrong. I immediately explained, "I am Ethan Walker's wife." He didn't answer right away. He turned the screen toward me. There was a line of text. Marital status. Divorced. Divorce date. June 18th last year. I stared at the line, feeling the blood drain from me bit by bit. 3 days ago, Ethan's yacht exploded. The news said he died. The Walker family said he didn't leave a will. The lawyer said I had to handle the inheritance papers as soon as possible. But now, a stranger told me I wasn't his wife anymore. Even more absurdly, there was a divorce agreement in the system. The agreement stated that I had voluntarily given up all of Ethan's assets, including real estate, including stocks, including cash, including the 12.8 billion inheritance left behind after his death. On the last page, there was my signature, Olivia Reed. The handwriting was exactly like mine that I stood in front of the counter. My fingers numb. I didn't cry. I just asked, "Who handled this?" The staff avoided my eyes. "All the documents are complete. Both parties signed. The procedures are legal." "I didn't sign. The system shows you did." "Where was I that day?" He paused. "That's not something we can answer." I looked at the screen and suddenly found it absurd. Ethan was dead. My marriage was dead too. And I was the last one to know. The marriage registry office was quiet. The air conditioning was cold. I sat on a plastic chair, holding the printed divorce papers. The paper was thin, but it felt like a stone, crushing me. June 18th last year. I remember that date. That day I was in the hospital. I had a high fever, lung infection, and felt dizzy. Ethan was by my bedside, holding my hand. He said, "Olivia, no matter what happens, you have to believe me." I thought it was a romantic thing to say at the time. Now it seems more like a last will. I turned to the second page of the divorce agreement. It said, "The couple's feelings have broken, and there is no possibility of living together." I chuckled. That night, he even fed me water with his own hands. He whispered, "You're too thin." He said he would take me to the seaside once I was better. On the same day, the document said, "There is no possibility of living together between Olivia Reed and Ethan Walker." I continued reading. "Olivia Reed voluntarily gives up all marital property and no longer makes any financial claims against Ethan Walker." I stared at these words, and my stomach churned. This isn't a divorce agreement. This is a skinning document. They aren't just ending my marriage. They are erasing me from Ethan's life. I shoved the document into my bag and walked out of the marriage registry office. It was raining outside. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Daniel Stone, Ethan's private lawyer. I answered. Daniel's voice was flat. "Mrs. Reed, do you have time now?" I gripped the phone. "What did you call me?" He paused for a second. "Ms. Reed." I closed my eyes. Even he knew. "Daniel, I just came out of the marriage registry office." "I know. You knew already." A few seconds of silence on the other end. "I suggest you don't talk on the phone." "You suggest?" My voice turned cold. "My husband died. I was told I was divorced long ago. There's a fake signature of mine on the divorce agreement. Now you're telling me what to do." Daniel said, "You'd better not go back to Walker Estate now." "Why?" "Because they're already waiting for you." The call ended. I stood in the rain, looking up at the gray sky. Them. Who were they? Ethan's mother Vivian, his uncle Richard, or the family lawyers who always shadowed Ethan like ghosts? I didn't listen to Daniel. I went straight to Walker Estate. It was where I lived for 3 years. The white iron gate was tall. Formerly, the security would open at the moment they saw my car. Today, the car was parked outside the door for 5 minutes, and the door didn't move. I rolled down the window. The security guard walked over, his face stiff. "Ms. Reed, they said you can't come in." I looked at him. "I am the mistress here." The security guard lowered his head. "Not anymore." I pushed open the car door and walked straight inside. 2 security guards blocked me. I didn't resist. I just looked towards the main building. Soon, the door opened. Vivian Walker came out. She was wearing a black long dress, her hair neatly tied up. She didn't look like a mother who had just lost her son. There was no breakdown, no exhaustion, only coldness on her face. Standing behind her was Richard Walker, and another woman, Madison White, Ethan's old lover. I recognized her. More accurately, the whole city knew her. She was the woman on the magazine cover. Beautiful, young, always knowing how to make the camera love her. She was wearing a black dress today too, but her hand was gently resting on her abdomen. That gesture was light enough for everyone to understand. Suddenly, I understood what Daniel meant. They were waiting for me to be humiliated. Vivian stood on the steps, looking down at me. "Olivia, you shouldn't have come. This is my home. Your home." She scoffed. "You and Ethan have been divorced for over a year. That document is fake. The court will look at the evidence, not listen to your tears." "I'm not crying." Vivian's gaze grew colder. "Good. Crying won't help." Madison took a step forward. Her voice was soft. "Olivia, I know it's hard for you to accept now, but Ethan made his choice before he passed." I looked at her. "It's none of your business." Her face paled slightly, but quickly returned to gentleness. I just hope you won't hurt the Walker family anymore. Ethan left so suddenly. I stared at her stomach. How long are you planning to keep this up? Madison's tears immediately welled up. She didn't shout. She just said in a very soft voice, "Impregnant." The air grew silent. The security guard looked at her. The maid looked at her. Vivian was not surprised. Richard doesn't have it either. I knew it. This play. They've rehearsed it. Madison took out a report from her bag. The child is Ethan's. He knew before he died. She looked at me. There was a hint of victory in her eyes. He was going to make our relationship public after he handled your divorce. I looked at the paper. It had the clinic's name. There was a date. There was her name. And the pregnancy result. I suddenly felt like laughing. You say he knew before he died? Yes. When? Madison bit her lip. 2 weeks before the explosion. I nodded. Those 2 weeks. Ethan was in my room every night. Madison's face froze. Vivian immediately spoke up. Enough. You're no longer his wife. You don't have the right to question anyone. Of course I do. I took out the divorce papers from my bag and held them up. Because someone forged my signature. Richard finally spoke. His voice was steady. Olivia, people deny reality when they're in pain. We understand you. But Ethan is already dead. If you continue to cause trouble now, you'll only make yourself look worse. Worse. I turned to look at him. Richard, you took away my marriage, my identity, my inheritance, and even arranged for a woman to stand in front of me with a fake pregnancy report. Do you think the person who looks worse is me? Richard's gaze darkened. Vivian said coldly, "Get her out." 2 security guards stepped forward. I didn't move. Who dares to touch me? I'll call the police. Vivian laughed as if she'd heard a joke. Call the police. Fine, you call the police. Tell the police that a divorced ex-wife is trespassing on her ex-husband's family estate and creating a scandal before the funeral. I looked at her. This woman was too clear-headed. She knew how to use her status to crush me. A legal wife could fight. An ex-wife could only cause trouble. They turned me from a wife into an ex-wife just for this moment. Outside the gate, several cars stopped. Journalists came down. Cameras focused on me. Someone asked loudly, "Olivia, are you here to fight for the inheritance? Are you and Ethan already divorced? Is Madison's pregnancy real? Are you here to cause trouble because you knew long ago that you couldn't inherit?" I looked at Vivian. She didn't look at the reporters. She just looked at me. That look said, "You lost." I stood in the rain, feeling cold all over, but I didn't back down. I said to the nearest camera, "I haven't divorced Ethan Walker. That divorce agreement is fake." The reporters got even more excited. "Do you have evidence?" I paused for a second. "No, I don't have it now. I only have memories. But memories can't beat documents." Madison took a light breath, as if hurt by me. "Olivia, please spare Ethan. He's gone." This sentence ignited the reporters. They pushed forward. The security guards pushed me out the door. I almost fell. Just then, a small box was thrown out by a servant. The box landed at my feet. Inside are my clothes, a few books, an old photo frame. There's also the wedding ring Ethan gave me. The ring rolled in the rain and stopped by my shoe. I slowly crouched down and picked it up. On our wedding day, Ethan put the ring on my hand with his own hands. He said, "This is my promise." Later, he didn't like me taking it off. He said I couldn't take it off even during arguments. But 3 months ago, he suddenly asked me to put the ring in a safe. He said the ring was old and wanted to help me get a new one. I didn't think much about it then. Now the ring is back in my hands, like an exhibit forgotten and left unclean. Vivian watched me put the ring away. Her tone filled with disgust. "Take your things and leave. Don't ever show up here again." I picked up the box. The reporters were still filming. I didn't look down. I walked out of Walker Estate step by step. The iron gate closed behind me. The sound was heavy, like a coffin closing. I drove back to my old apartment. It was where I and Ethan lived before we got married. After we got married, he always insisted I keep it. I asked why. He said, "A person should always have a place to go back to." I laughed at him for being too pessimistic. Now I understand. He might have known long ago that one day I would be kicked out. The apartment had been empty for a long time. There was a dusty smell in the air. I put the box on the table and took out the items one by one. Clothes, books, photo frames, rings. I placed the ring under the light to look at it. It okayed unchanged. A platinum ring, engraved with our names on the inside. Ethan, Olivia. I rubbed the inside circle and my fingertips suddenly touched a rough spot. I froze. There was nothing here before. I took out my phone and opened the magnifying glass. Besides the original names on the inside of the ring, there was a line of very small letters at the bottom. The letters were thin, as if they had been engraved later. I held my breath and read the sentence clearly. "Don't believe the death certificate." My hand trembled violently. The ring fell on the table with a soft clink that I stared at the words, my heart feeling as if it had been grabbed hard. Ethan is dead. The news said he's dead. The Walker family said he's dead. The death certificate has already come out, but his ring told me, "Don't believe the death certificate." Chapter 2. A fake divorce. A real trap. I didn't sleep all night. I placed the ring on the table, the light illuminating the small words, "Don't believe the death certificate." This sentence felt like a needle, piercing my mind. When did Ethan carve these words? Why didn't he just tell me directly? What does he actually know? I remembered 3 months ago, when he took my ring. That night he came back very late. There was the smell of sea and tobacco on his coat. I asked where he had been. He said he was just on business. His face was very tired. I thought he was under too much pressure. I walked over to hug him. And he hugged me tightly. That night, he barely slept. At 4 a.m. I woke up once. He was sitting on the bedside looking at me. His eyes were deep. That it feels like a farewell. The next day, he asked me to take off the ring. He said he wanted to get a new one. I even laughed at him for wasting money. Now, thinking back, every detail seemed like a warning, but I didn't see it. After dawn, the first thing I did was check June 18th of last year, the date on the divorce papers. I dug out the backup of my old phone and found photos from that day. In the photos, I was lying on a hospital bed, with a needle in my hand. Ethan was sitting beside me, cutting an apple for me. The photo time displayed 3:27 p.m. on June 18th. The divorce agreement signing time 3:10 p.m. on June 18th. At the same time, I was in the hospital. They said I signed the divorce papers at the marriage registration office. Unless I can split myself in two. I saved the photo 3 times and sent it to different email addresses. Then I went to the hospital. The front desk nurse checked my name. She checked for a long time. Finally, she looked up and said, "Sorry. There's no hospital record of your admission on June 18th of last year in the system." I looked at her. Check again. I already did. I've been here for 4 days. Lung infection. The doctor is Harper. One of the nurses is named Grace. The nurse's hand paused. She looked up at me, and her gaze changed for a moment. "Ms. Reed, it's not in the system. It's not there. Or was it deleted?" Her face paled slightly. "I can't answer that question." I stared at her. She avoided my eyes. I didn't press her further. I walked to the end of the corridor and called Ryan Cole. This number I found in Ethan's old business card holder. Ryan was once Ethan's security chief. He left suddenly 2 years ago. Ethan said he had done something wrong. I believed him then. The phone rang for a long time before someone answered. A low voice came. "Who?" "I'm Olivia Reed." Silence on the other end. After a few seconds, he said, "You finally called." Those words sent a chill down my spine. "Do you know we'll find you?" Ethan said. "If something happened to him, you would eventually notice something was wrong." I gripped my phone. "Do you know something happened to him? I know he might get into trouble. Do you know the divorce agreement is fake?" "I don't know the details, but I know someone will ruin your identity first." I closed my eyes. So it wasn't sudden. Ethan knew. Ryan knew. Maybe Daniel knew too. Only I didn't. I felt like I was in a glass box, with everyone outside watching the fire coming, while I still thought it was the sunset. I asked, "Where are you?" Ryan gave me an address. Half an hour later, I met him at an old cafe. Ryan was skinnier than I remembered. He was wearing a black jacket with a very faint scar on his face. He sat in the corner, back to the wall, his eyes always looking at the door. After I sat down, he didn't greet me. "You shouldn't have gone to Walker Estate. Everyone said so, because they want you to die like a joke." I looked at him. "Be clear." Ryan pushed a brown paper bag towards me. Inside were a few photos. The photos showed Ethan's yacht, and a few strangers. Ryan pointed to one of them. 2 days before the explosion, this person was on the boat. "He's not a maintenance worker. He's Richard Walker's man." My chest tightened. "Richard, Ethan's uncle. Why?" Ryan didn't answer immediately. He took out another piece of paper. It was a bank statement. The amount was large. The transfers were to several shell companies. 2 months before Ethan died, he asked me to investigate an overseas account. The money flowed out of the Walker Group's medical fund, through 3 companies, and finally into an account controlled by Richard. "Does Vivian know?" Ryan looked at me. Vivian Walker couldn't possibly not know. My fingers grew cold. Ethan's mother, his uncle, his old lover, they stood at the estate's gate, like a complete family. And me, his wife, treated as an outsider. Why didn't Ethan tell me? I asked. Ryan was silent. I scoffed. "Don't you men all think that keeping things secret is protection?" Ryan didn't argue. "I only know he didn't want you involved in this, but they've already dragged me in." "Yes," Ryan said. "So you have to survive." I looked at him. "Are you helping me?" "I owe Ethan a life." "What do you owe me?" Ryan looked up at me. I said, "If you knew there was danger but didn't tell me anything, you owe me the truth too." He didn't avoid my gaze. "All right, I'll help you look into it." I placed the divorce agreement on the table. "First thing, prove it's fake." Ryan flipped a few pages. His brow furrowed slowly. "The signature looks very similar. My sister Sophia has my signature sample. She might have been used by Vivian." "What about the fingerprints?" "The document says there are records of my fingerprints." Ryan's expression darkened. "That's more complicated than the signature." "Why?" "If they have your old identification application materials, they can replicate the fingerprint image. It's technically possible." I understood. This wasn't a spontaneous scam. It was a well-prepared trap. After leaving the cafe, I went to Daniel Stone's law firm. Daniel's office was in the most expensive skyscraper in the city center. The receptionist didn't want to let me in. That I said directly, "Tell Daniel that if he doesn't see me, he'll shout Ethan Walker's name in the lobby so everyone can hear it." 5 minutes later, Daniel let me in. He was still the same. Suit neat, No extra expression on his face. He didn't seem sad about the client's death. He looked like he was waiting for a procedure to finish. I placed the ring on his desk. Explain. Daniel glanced down. His gaze changed, though only for a second. But I saw it. He knew. This is what Ethan gave you. He said. Is this message also what he carved? I can't answer. You can't. Or you won't. Daniel looked up. Olivia, you don't have a legal identity right now. I chuckled. That's the first thing everyone says. Because it's the truth. Truth. I threw the divorce agreement in his face. This document is fake. The signature is fake. The date is fake. I was in the hospital that day. Daniel looked at the file. Without touching it, then you go prove it. I need Ethan's will. You don't have the right to view it that I am his wife. Not in the system. I stared at him. You are so cold-blooded. Daniel was silent. I stood up. It was Ethan's mistake to trust you. I turned to leave. But Daniel spoke. June 18th. I stopped. He said, if you want to investigate, start with the original hospital backups from June 18th. Don't check the system. It has already been cleared. I slowly turned around. You just said you couldn't answer. I didn't answer. Daniel looked at me. I was just reminding you that electronic systems aren't the only records. Why are you helping me? I wasn't helping you. What are you afraid of? Daniel's expression didn't change, but his fingers gently pressed on the table. I'm afraid you'll die too quickly. Those words made me shiver. Will they kill me? Daniel said. They've already started. I stared at him. Ethan. He didn't speak. That was the answer. When I left the law firm, it was already dark. There were over a dozen missed calls on my phone. It's all media. And there's also a text message from a strange number. Want to know who Ethan saw last before he died? 9 p.m. Old Wharf. I forwarded the message to Ryan. Ryan replied quickly. Don't go. I replied. I have to go. Ryan replied. Then at least don't go alone. I stared at the screen. My fingers paused for a few seconds. I don't like being told what to do, but I'm not stupid either. At 8:40 p.m. I arrived near the Old Wharf. Ryan was already there. He parked the car in the shadows. The message could be a lure. He said, I know, you still came. Because some lures mean the fish are very scared. Ryan glanced at me and said no more. At exactly 9 p.m., a man wearing a hat appeared. He was nervous, constantly looking around. Ryan whispered, don't get out. I didn't move. The man walked under the streetlight, took out an envelope, and put it next to the trash bin. Then he quickly left. Ryan got out to pick it up. Just as he reached the trash bin, a black car suddenly sped out from the darkness. It hit him straight on, very fast. I shouted, Ryan. Ryan reacted quickly, dodging to the side. The front of the car hit the trash bin, sending metal fragments flying. The black car didn't stop, immediately backed up, and charged at him again. I picked up my phone to call the police, but before I could press the button, another hand reached out from the back seat and forcefully covered my mouth. My mind went blank. When did someone get in the car? I struggled desperately. The man was very strong. I smelled a pungent odor, like medication. I hit him with my elbow. The person behind me grunted. I grabbed the door handle and forcefully pushed the door open. Rolling out in the process, knees hit the ground hard. It hurt so much I almost screamed. Ryan had already drawn his gun. The black car suddenly changed direction, speeding towards me. The light was blinding. Just then, Ryan lunged forward, dragging me to the side. The black car scraped past my legs, crashed through the guardrail, and disappeared into the night. The dock fell silent. Only my breathing remained. Ryan helped me up. Are you injured? I shook my head. My knee was bleeding, but I didn't care. I looked at my car. The back seat was empty. The person had run. Ryan checked the door, finding it pried open. His expression grew grim. They didn't just want to scare you. I know. They want to kidnap you. I looked at the envelope next to the trash can. Ryan picked it up. Inside the envelope was only a photo. The photo was slightly blurry. It was a screenshot from the dock surveillance camera the day before the explosion. Ethan stood beside the yacht that a woman stood opposite him. Not Madison, not Vivian. It was my sister, Sophia Reed. I stared at the photo, my palms growing cold. Sophia lowered her head, holding a file folder. Ethan looked at her. His expression was cold. Suddenly, I realized that what Sophia had been hiding was more than I thought. I looked for her that night. Sophia lived in a small apartment. When she opened the door and saw me, her expression changed instantly. Olivia, how did you get here? I threw the photo in her face. Explain. Sophia glanced at it, her body freezing. Don't say you don't know. Don't say you were just passing by. Don't lie to me anymore. Her eyes reddened. I didn't harm you. Then why were you with Ethan? She bit her lips. Vivian looked for me. I didn't say anything. Sophia started crying. She said your marriage to Ethan is about to end. She said you won't get anything. She said she would help me clear my debts as long as I gave her some of your signed documents. I felt a heavy weight in my heart. What did you give her? A copy of your university application form, and a few signed authorization documents you had signed before. Anything else? Sophia avoided looking at me. I took a step closer. What else? Her voice was barely a whisper. There was also your old passport application materials. I closed my eyes. Signatures, fingerprints, identification. They had it all. I opened my eyes and looked at her. Do you know what they did with this? Sophia shook her head. crying. I don't know. I really don't know. What did Ethan say when you saw him? Sophia trembled. He said if I got any closer to you, he would put me in jail. What else did he say? He said Vivian didn't just want you to divorce. Sophia looked up at me, her voice trembling. He said they wanted you legally disappeared. I stared at her. What do you mean? Sophia shook her head. I don't know. I really don't know. I didn't believe her, that I can tell she is truly afraid. It's not an act. I turned to leave. Sophia suddenly grabbed me. Olivia. There's one more thing. I turned back. She took out a small note from the drawer. Ethan gave it to me that day. He said, if you come to find me, give this to you. I took the note. It had only a string of numbers and a name. Harbor House. The Harbor House. That was a small cabin Ethan bought by the sea. I had never been there. Ethan had never told me either. There was another line of text on the back of the note. The ring will take her there. I stood in Sophia's living room, suddenly feeling as if everything around me was spinning. Ethan had arranged everything. He had arranged everyone. Ryan, Daniel, Sophia, even the ring. But he had never told me. I left with the note. Downstairs, Ryan was waiting by the car. After I got in, I handed him the note. Go here. Ryan's expression changed after reading it. Are you sure? Do you know this place? Ethan once had me install a security system there. What's inside? Ryan didn't answer. After the car drove 2 blocks away, he finally said, a safe. I looked out the window. The city lights sped past quickly. I thought I was investigating a scam, but now I understood. I was walking into the maze Ethan left behind, and at the center of the maze, it might not be the inheritance. It was the truth about his death. By the time we reached the seaside cabin, it was nearly 2 in the morning. The house was quiet, a white wooden house facing the Black Sea. Ryan checked the door lock. It hadn't been tampered with. I tried the numbers from the note. The door opened. There was no dust inside, like someone cleaned it regularly. A painting hung on the living room wall. It depicted the sea. I moved closer and noticed a thin gap behind the frame. Ryan helped me take it down. Sure enough, there was a safe in the wall. The keypad glowed with blue light. I entered the numbers from the note. Incorrect. I entered our wedding anniversary. Incorrect. I stood there, my mind racing. The ring would take her there. I picked up the ring and looked at the inside. Ethan, Olivia. Here is that sentence. Don't believe the death certificate. Suddenly, I remembered that our first meeting was on September 12th. That day, he knocked over my coffee. I cursed him, but he laughed. I typed 0912. The safe made a sound. It opened. Inside was an old phone, a document, and a black hard drive. I picked up the document. The cover said, last will copy. Executor, Ethan Walker. Heir, Olivia Reed. My hand clenched tightly. Ryan plugged in the old phone to charge. A few minutes later, the phone lit up. There was only one video file on the screen. The file name was, For Olivia. I opened it. In the video, Ethan was sitting in the study. He was wearing a white shirt and looked very tired. His eyes stared directly at the camera, like he was looking at me. My breath stopped. In the video, he spoke. Olivia, if you see this video, it means they have already acted. That my tears suddenly fell. I bit my lip hard, not letting myself cry out. Ethan continued, don't believe my mother. Don't believe Madison. Don't believe Daniel immediately either. I looked at Ryan. His expression was also grim. In the video, Ethan paused. Then he said, most importantly, don't believe I'm already dead. After the video ended, only the sound of waves remained in the room. I sat on the sofa, holding the old phone in my hand. The screen was already dark, but Ethan's voice was still in my ear. Don't believe I'm already dead. This sentence was more terrifying than the news of his death. If he was dead, I would only need to avenge him. If he wasn't dead, then I would have to face another question. Why did he make me endure all this? Why did he make me leave home? Why did he put me in front of the reporters, like a greedy madwoman? Why didn't he tell me? I didn't collapse immediately. I rewatched the video 3 times. With each time, I listened more calmly. Ethan's background is his study. The curtains are closed. There is a cup of coffee on the desk. He is wearing a wedding ring on his left hand. There is a little bit of blood on his cuff. Not much, but I saw it. Pause, I said. Ryan pressed pause. I pointed at the screen. He's injured. Ryan glanced. Like a scrape. No, I said. Ethan is very conscious of his image. If it were just a scrape, he wouldn't be filming with blood. Ryan was silent. I continued watching the scene. There is a clock in the upper right corner of the desk. The time is 1:17 a.m. The date is not visible. I noted all this down. Then I opened the copy of the will. The will is thick, but the key points are clear. If Ethan dies, I will inherit all his private assets, including the residence, funds, accounts, collections, and overseas trust income. More importantly, the 37 voting rights in Walker Group held by him will be temporarily managed by me, until the court confirms the final inheritance. I turned the pages one by one. Finally, my breathing grew shallow. Additional clause. If anyone attempts to influence Olivia Reed's inheritance by forging marriage documents, divorce documents, identity authorization, or pregnancy certificates, The Walker family trust assets will automatically enter a freeze procedure. I looked up at Ryan. He knew they would do this. Ryan didn't deny it. Yes. When did you know? 1 month before the explosion. I threw the will on the table. So you all knew. But I didn't. Ryan looked at me. Ethan didn't want you involved. Don't speak for him. My voice turned cold. He's not trying to keep me out. He's putting me on the chessboard without telling me the rules. Ryan didn't say anything. I stood up and walked around the living room twice. Anger kept me clear-headed. Ed, sadness slows people down. Anger doesn't. We need to do 3 things now. I said. First, back up the video and the will. Second, find Daniel. Third, restore the hospital records. Ryan nodded. There's a fourth. What? Move. We can't stay here. Just as he finished speaking, a faint noise came from outside. Ryan immediately turned off the lights. He pulled me to the wall and whispered, "Don't make a sound." Someone was outside. The footsteps were light. It wasn't just one person. I held my breath. Ryan drew his gun and walked to the window. Through the gap in the curtains, I saw 2 shadows approaching the cabin. They didn't knock. They started picking the lock directly. Ryan signaled for me to go to the back door. I shoved the old phone, the will, and the hard drive into my bag. The back door led to the beach. The wind was strong. We had just stepped outside when the front door was kicked open. Someone rushed into the room. Ryan grabbed me and ran along the wooden walkway. Shouts came from behind. "There's someone behind." Gunshots rang out. The fence was broken. For the first time, I truly realized they didn't just want me to shut up. They wanted to kill me. Ryan shoved me into the car and moved to the driver's seat himself. As soon as the car started, a black SUV came speeding out from the side. It crashed into our car. My body slammed hard against the door, and my bag fell to the ground. Ryan gritted his teeth and backed up. The SUV crashed into us again. The coastal road was narrow. One side was a mountain wall. The other side was a railing and dark seawater. Ryan swerved violently, the wheels scraping against the railing as they shot out. I gripped the handrail. How did they know we were here? Ryan's face was ashen. Either someone is following us, or someone knows this place. How many people know this place? Me, Ethan, Daniel. There was one more. Sophia. I didn't say it out loud. After the car merged onto the main road, Ryan turned twice. Finally, the car behind us. We didn't go back to the apartment. Ryan took me to his safe house. It was an old warehouse on the 2nd floor. The windows were boarded up. Inside there was only a bed, a computer, and several boxes of water. Very basic, but safe. At least temporarily safe. I sat at the desk, laying out all the documents. Ryan copied the video onto 3 encrypted drives. "Now what?" he asked. "Find Daniel." "Do you trust him?" "Not really." "Why look for him?" "Because Ethan said not to trust Daniel immediately. Not never to trust." One looked at the will. He must have the next step in his hands. After dawn, we went to Daniel's office. This time, Daniel didn't let the receptionist stop me. He seemed to know I would come. I placed the copy of the will on his desk. "Have you seen this?" Daniel glanced at it. "Yes." "Where is the original?" "Safely stored." "Why not bring it out?" "The conditions aren't met." I sneered. "My husband died. I was fake divorced. I was almost hit by a car, and someone tried to kill me last night. You're telling me the conditions aren't met?" Daniel looked up at me. "You haven't proven you are a legal wife." I stared at him. "Then prove it. You need the original hospital records, a handwriting analysis, a fingerprint source report, and evidence proving someone broke into the system during the divorce process. Do you have them?" "I have part of it. Why not give it to me?" Daniel said calmly. "Because you were followed last night. If it's in your hands, you'll die faster." I slammed the table. "Don't use my life as an excuse to control me." Daniel finally fell silent. I bent down, staring into his eyes. "Ethan has already done this once. I won't allow anyone else to do it again." The room was quiet. A few seconds later, Daniel opened the drawer and took out a folder. "This is the access request for the hospital's backup server. Dr. Harper is willing to testify, but he's missing now." My heart tightened. Missing. Uncontactable last night. Because I went to the hospital to check the records. Possible. I closed my eyes. They moved too fast. Every person who knows the truth is being cleared. Daniel took out another report. "This is the preliminary handwriting analysis of the divorce agreement. The signature isn't yours. The forger is familiar with your handwriting, but the pressure and pauses are inconsistent." I took the report. "Finally, there's a first knife. Where are the fingerprints?" "Still looking, but I suspect the source is your old passport data." I looked at him. "Sophia gave it to Vivian." Daniel wasn't surprised. He knew all along. I asked, "Did you check her too?" "Ethan checked." "Why didn't you tell me?" Daniel looked at me. "Because she's your sister." I laughed, but the smile was cold. "So he thinks I can't handle it." Daniel didn't answer. I put away the file. "I'm holding a press conference." Ryan frowned. "Too soon." Daniel also said, "The evidence isn't complete enough." "It is." I said. "They've already put me in the spotlight. Now it's my turn to speak. Vivian will retaliate." "Of course." I looked at Daniel. "If she doesn't retaliate, how will I catch her at fault?" That afternoon, I contacted 3 media outlets using the address of Ethan's old apartment. Not entertainment media, financial media, and a legal channel. I only said one thing. "I have evidence that someone within the Walker family forged my divorce documents. with the intention of seizing the 12.8 billion inheritance. At 4 in the afternoon, the reporters arrived. The location was the conference room downstairs from Daniel's law firm. Daniel doesn't want to stand beside me. I don't need to either. When the camera was focused on me, I wasn't wearing a black dress. I was wearing a white shirt and black pants. My hair was tied up. There were no tear marks on my face. I looked at the camera and said, "I am Olivia Reed, Ethan Walker's wife." The first reporter immediately asked, "The system shows you are divorced. Are you denying the official records?" I said, "I'm not denying the records. I'm accusing the records of being falsified." A moment of silence fell in the venue. I took out the handwriting report. The signature on the divorce agreement was not written by me. Then I produced a photo. On the day the agreement was signed, I was hospitalized. Here is the original photo timestamp. The reporter asked, "Has the hospital confirmed?" I said, "The hospital system records have been deleted, and we have applied for the restoration of the original backup." "Who do you think did it?" I paused for a second. Everyone who benefits from this fake divorce is a suspect, including Vivian Walker. Including. The moment I said that, the venue exploded. That I continued to say, "After Ethan Walker's death, someone immediately produced a fake divorce agreement. Someone immediately produced a fake pregnancy certificate, and someone immediately tried to exclude me from the list of heirs. This is not a coincidence." The reporter followed up, "You say Madison White's pregnancy certificate is fake. Do you have evidence?" "I'm investigating. Lack of evidence is libel." I looked at that reporter. "Then please have Madison White take a paternity test and make the clinic records public." The scene was silent again. I said to the camera, "I'm not afraid to investigate. The ones who are afraid to investigate should answer the questions." After the press conference, public opinion online began to reverse. Some cursed me for being greedy. Some said the Walker family was too hasty. Some began to dig into Madison's prenatal clinic. 2 hours later, Ryan brought the news. "Madison's report has problems." I looked up. The clinic in the report has been closed for 3 months. The doctor's license has also been revoked. I laughed. "She was too hasty. That only proves the report is suspicious. It doesn't prove she's not pregnant. Enough. Make her panic first." Just as I finished speaking, my phone rang. "Vivian." I answered. Her voice showed no sign of panic. "Olivia, you're dumber than I thought. You called just to praise me. Do you think holding a press conference will win you this? At least you have to respond now." Vivian sneered. "I don't need to respond. Have you forgotten the prenuptial agreement Ethan and you signed before getting married?" My fingers tightened. Prenuptial agreement. Of course. I remembered. Back then, Ethan said it was just a family procedure. He said it wouldn't affect me. I didn't read it carefully. I loved him, so I signed. Vivian continued. "That agreement is very clear. Regardless of whether the marriage is valid, you cannot inherit the core assets of the Walker family." I didn't speak. Her voice became softer. "You said in front of the media that you are his wife. Fine. Even if you prove it, you still won't get a share of the group stock." The call ended. That I stood still, feeling real cold for the first time. The fake divorce was just the first layer. The premarital agreement was the second layer. They had prepared more than one knife. Daniel walked over from the side. He saw my expression and asked, "Did Vivian mention the premarital agreement?" I looked at him. "You know too." "No." "Is it valid?" Daniel was silent for 2 seconds. "Under normal circumstances, yes." My heart sank. "In abnormal circumstances." Daniel opened the filing cabinet and took out another copy. "Ethan showed me that agreement before his wedding. He noticed that the date Vivian arranged for the witnesses was wrong. The signing date didn't match the witnessing date." "What does that mean?" "Strictly speaking, that agreement has major procedural flaws." "Can it be overturned?" "It can be tried." "You knew earlier." "Ethan knew earlier." I clenched my fists. It's Ethan again. He knows every trap. He also knows every loophole. He's like someone who wrote the script in advance, and I'm walking through his script. Step by step. At night, Ryan took me back to the safe house. I washed the blood off my knee and sat on the edge of the bed. My phone kept vibrating. News alerts kept coming in. Walker estate case reversed. Ex-wife still a legal wife. Madison White pregnancy report questioned. Vivian Walker not responding. I wasn't happy. Too smooth. Too smooth to be normal. At 9:17 p.m. A strange number sent a text message. Only one sentence. "Tomorrow at 10 a.m. A temporary court hearing. If you go, Ethan will die a second time." I stared at the sentence. Every word felt like ice. Ryan's expression changed after reading the message. "They know the court time." Daniel had just applied for a temporary hearing. Not many people knew the time. Me, Ryan, Daniel, the court, and the lawyers from the walk. Our family. I placed my phone on the table. "This isn't a threat to me." Ryan looked at me. I said, "This is telling me Ethan is still alive." The air in the room suddenly turned cold. Ryan didn't speak. I stared at him. "Did you know this all along?" Ryan's hand tightened slowly. He avoided my eyes. In that second, I knew the answer. I stood up and asked him, word by word, "Ryan, on the day of the explosion, who did you really save from the sea?" Ryan didn't answer me, but his silence was enough. I stood under the dim light of the safe house. staring at him. On the day of the explosion, who did you really save from the sea? Ryan's jaw tightened. Olivia, this isn't the time to talk about this. I laughed. I've heard enough of that line. I stepped closer to him. Ethan knows the danger. Daniel knows the file. Sophia knows the signature. Vivian knows the fake divorce. Madison knows the fake pregnancy. Now even you know he's not dead. My voice was very soft that I was the only one who looked like a fool, wearing a black dress and standing in the rain, being pushed out from my husband's doorstep. Ryan looked at me. Guilt was in his eyes. But guilt wasn't useful. I didn't need a man's guilt. I needed the truth. I said, last time, who did you save? Ryan finally spoke. Ethan. My heart dropped, not because of surprise, but because of confirmation. I had already guessed, but hearing it firsthand was like being torn open from the chest. Where is he? I can't tell. I slapped him. The sound was loud. Ryan didn't dodge. My hand tingled. You can't tell. I looked at him coldly. Then I'll tell you what I can do. I picked up the phone on the table. I'm calling the reporters right now. Saying Ethan Walker is alive. Saying Ryan Cole was involved in faking his death. Saying Daniel Stone hid the will. Saying the Walker family staged an inheritance scam. Ryan's expression finally changed. You can't do this. Of course I can. This will kill him. Then he deserves it. Ryan froze. I said word by word. If Ethan is still alive, but lets me bear his death, fake divorce, pursuit, and humiliation, then he doesn't deserve my protection. The safe house was terrifyingly quiet. Outside, the sound of a car drove away in the distance. Ryan whispered. He was severely injured. I didn't speak. The explosion wasn't arranged by him. He knew someone was going to act, but he didn't expect them to do it early. He planned to leave the ship before the explosion, to catch Richard's people, but the ship exploded early, so he didn't die. He was blown into the sea. I brought people to rescue him. He has multiple burns all over his body, inhaled thick smoke, and was in a coma for 6 days. My fingertips grew slightly cold. I forced myself not to ask if he was in pain. That was a question a wife would ask. And now, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to be his wife anymore. Then what? I asked. Ryan lowered his eyes. He forbade us to notify you. This was even harsher than before. I nodded. Good. Ryan immediately said. He's not uncareful about you. Shut up. I looked at him. Don't translate his love for him. The fact is simple. He woke up. He knows him being torn apart by them. He chose to keep hiding. Ryan didn't argue, because he couldn't argue. I sat back down in the chair and picked up the will. The edges of the paw were sharp. I suddenly calmed down. Why can't he appear? Ryan said. There are people from the Walker family behind Richard, but not only them. He's also involved with an overseas fund. If Ethan appears now, they will immediately cut off all accounts and pin the blame on a dead substitute. So I'm the bait. Ryan was silent. I finished his sentence. They want to force me out. Ethan wants me to retaliate. As long as I move, Vivian and Richard will panic. They the more urgent, the more evidence they reveal. Ryan's expression was grim. He said you're smarter than anyone else. I sneered. He also said he loves me. Ryan said nothing. I put the will in my bag. The court hearing tomorrow. I'll go. The text says Ethan will die a second time. I cut him off. That means they're afraid of me going. Ryan looked at me. What if this is a trap? Of course, it's a trap. Then why are you still going? Traps aren't meant to be avoided. Traps are meant to be used in reverse. I handed him my phone. Check this number. Also, prepare 2 cars. Tomorrow you take 1 fake car out the front door. It'll go out the back door. Ryan nodded. What about Daniel? Notify him. Do you trust him? I don't. I looked at the video backup on the table. So let him stand under the camera too. The more public, the less likely he is to betray. At 9:20 the next morning, I put on a black suit and put on Ethan's ring. Not because of nostalgia, because it's evidence. I don't need to look pitiful. Pitiful people get eaten. I need to look like someone who's ready to collect a debt. Ryan left through the main entrance as planned, driving my car. 10 minutes later, I got into another car through the back door of the warehouse. The driver was Daniel. I glanced at him. Coming in person. Aren't you afraid of being caught on camera? Daniel said calmly. It's already this far. Running makes no sense. When did you realize Ethan was dead? His hand gripped the steering wheel. Without hesitation. 7 days after the explosion. So you were lying to me yesterday. I was following his instructions. Don't use that as an excuse anymore. Daniel looked at me. You hate him now. It's not hate. I said. It's reevaluating his worth. Daniel was silent for a moment. That sounds like him. I turned to look out the window. Don't insult me. Journalists had gathered outside the courthouse. Vivian had arrived. She was dressed in a gray suit, her expression composed. Richard stood beside her, like a sad but rational elder. Madison was also there. She was wearing a loose white dress, her hand still on her abdomen. She really liked this gesture, like holding a ticket that would never be checked. But today, this ticket was going to be torn. As soon as I got out of the car, reporters surrounded me. Olivia, what evidence will you submit today? Do you still insist that you haven't divorced Ethan? Do you think the Walker family is plotting to steal the inheritance? I didn't stop. I only said one thing. After today, It will be clearer who is lying. I walked into the hearing room. Vivian saw me. Her gaze as cold as a knife. You really dare to come. I sat opposite her. You really dare to fear. Her expression changed slightly. Richard gently held her hand. He looked at me. His tone gentle. Olivia. We could have resolved this gracefully. The grace you call for is giving me 30 million and letting me admit to a fake divorce. Richard didn't deny it. At least you can still live safely. Safety. I looked at him. Safety from break failure. Or safety from the old doc kidnapping. Richard's gaze finally dimmed. You don't have evidence. You're about to. The judge entered. The hearing began. Daniel stood up. First to submit the preliminary report on the handwriting analysis. The report showed that the signature on the divorce agreement had high imitation traces. The stroke order, pressure variations, and finishing habits were all inconsistent with my real signature. Vivian's lawyer immediately countered. A preliminary report cannot overturn a registered divorce document. Daniel wasn't rushed. He submitted a second piece of evidence. This is an original photograph of Ms. Reed from June 18 last year, taken at the hospital, including device time information and cloud backup records. The opposing lawyer said, photos can be faked. Daniel said, so we apply to access the hospital's backup server. The opposing lawyer immediately said, the hospital system doesn't have her admission records. I looked at Vivian. She had no expression. Daniel was waiting for this exact line. He pulled out a third document. This is the hospital's night backup log that IT shows that 2 days before Ethan Walker's death, someone used administrator privileges to delete Olivia Reed's hospital records from June 18 to June 21 last year. The hearing room fell silent. The opposing lawyer's expression changed. The judge frowned. Who deleted it? Daniel said, the account belongs to the hospital administrator, but we have reason to believe the account was accessed externally. From where? Daniel looked at me. I stood up and handed in a transfer record. The wife of the hospital administrator received a 500,000 transfer the day before the records were deleted. The payment account was from a company under the Walker Family Foundation. Vivian finally spoke. The Walker family makes large charitable payments every year. You can't accuse us just because of a name. I looked at her. I didn't say it was you. UST said the money went out of your control. Vivian's jaw tightened. She didn't like being out of control. I understood that now. She was used to standing high, watching others explain. But today, it was her turn to explain. Daniel continued to submit documents. This time, it was a fingerprint copy report that he explained that the fingerprint images on the divorce agreement were too clean, lacking the normal spread of oils and variations in depth caused by pressing. It was more like a transfer from old identification materials. Sophia was summoned for remote testimony. When she appeared on the screen, her eyes were red and swollen. Vivian looked at her as if she wanted to kill her. Sophia trembled and said, Vivian Walker gave me money. She said she just needed Olivia's signature sample and old passport documents. I didn't know they would use them for the divorce documents. Vivian's lawyer immediately said, the witness has dead issues, so her testimony is not credible. Daniel directly presented the transfer records. The money was transferred from Vivian's personal assistant-controlled account to Sophia's account. The date was exactly 2 weeks before the fake divorce documents were registered. The hearing room fell silent again. Okayed at Vivian. She was still sitting very straight. Such people wouldn't easily fall. She must have another card up her sleeve. Indeed. Vivian's lawyer stood up. Even if the divorce documents are contested, Olivia Reed is not qualified to inherit the core assets of the Walker Group. We are submitting the prenuptial agreement. The document was handed up. At that moment, I heard low murmurs from the press section. A prenuptial agreement. That was Vivian's real knife. She looked at me, finally showing a hint of a smile. She thought I would panic. I didn't. Daniel took the agreement, glanced at it. Then he said, we are submitting an invalidation application for the agreement simultaneously. Vivian's smile faded. Daniel handed the other document to the judge. The prenuptial agreement was signed 3 years ago, April 3rd, but the notarization records show the witnessing date was April 2nd. In other words, the witnessing process was already completed before Olivia Reed signed the agreement. The judge reviewed the documents. Daniel continued, this is not a typo, because the witness at the time admitted that he did not personally see Olivia Reed sign the agreement. He just completed the documents ahead of schedule as per Vivian Walker's request. Vivian looked sharply at Daniel that second. She finally lost a bit of control. You're lying, Daniel said calmly. The witness recording has already been submitted. The recording played. A man's tense voice. Vivian said this is just a family procedure. Ethan won't pursue it. I didn't see Olivia Reed herself sign it. I just pre-authorized the stamp. The recording ended. I looked at Vivian. You even paved the way for me before I got married. Vivian said coldly. You don't deserve Ethan, so you forged the documents. I was protecting the Walker family. I stared at her. No, you were protecting your need for control. Richard finally spoke up. Enough. Today isn't about emotional judgment. Ethan is dead, and the inheritance process must respect the existing documents. He finished speaking and nodded at the lawyer. The other party submitted a new investigation document, the yacht explosion accident confirmation report. It stated, Ethan Walker's death was confirmed. DNA samples matched. The death certificate is valid. Richard looked at me. Olivia, you can continue to argue about the marriage, but you can't deny Ethan is dead. Just as he finished speaking, My phone vibrated. Ryan sent a message. There's a problem with the DNA report. The sample isn't a complete Ethan sample. It's just a comparison of a toothbrush and bloodstains. The source of the bloodstain might have been switched. I looked up at Richard. He was too eager. He wanted to use the death certificate to suppress everything. But he forgot. Now what I most is death. Daniel also received the message. He glanced at me. I nodded slightly. Daniel stood up. We apply for a re-examination of the death certificate. The hearing room exploded. Vivian jumped up abruptly. Are you crazy? You're insulting my son. I looked at her. If he really is your son, you should want to know the truth more than anyone else. Vivian's face turned pale instantly. Madison sat in the back, her fingers gripping her skirt tightly. Richard stared at me. For the first time, a murderous look in his eyes. The judge announced a 10-minute recess. I left the hearing room and went to the restroom. Just as I closed the door, my phone rang. Stranger number. I answered. Without speaking, a very light breathing sound came from the other end of the phone. Then a processed voice. Olivia, stop. My fingers were tight. Who are you? Stop looking for the death certificate. Why? Silence on the other end. I suddenly said, Ethan. The breathing sound changed, for only a moment, but I heard it. I leaned against the wall and gave a cold laugh. Finally, you decided to call me. The other end still didn't speak. My voice turned completely cold. Listen carefully, whether you're dead or alive. I don't care. From the moment you left me alone to face all this, you lost the right to command me. Finally, a word came from the other end of the phone. Very low, very hoarse. They'll kill you. My eyes suddenly grew hot. Not from emotion, from anger. They've killed me several times already. I said. Word by word. Ethan Walker, if you're still alive, open your eyes wide. Your wife doesn't need your permission to live. I hung up the phone as I walked out of the restroom. Madison was standing at the door. Her face was very pale. Obviously, she heard part of it. I looked at her. Get out of the way. She didn't move. Is he still alive? I stopped. Madison's voice was trembling. Is Ethan still alive? I looked into her eyes and suddenly understood. She didn't know either. She wasn't the core. She was just a tool pushed out by Vivian and Richard. She thought she could exchange the fake child for money. But if Ethan wasn't dead, her fake act would turn into real criminal fraud. I approached her. You still have a chance to tell the truth. Madison's lips were trembling. I don't know if they'll kill someone. What did they make you do? I can't say that. Then you'll finish with them. I turned to leave. Madison grabbed my wrist from behind. They made me say I'm pregnant. Vivian said she would give me $50 million if I cooperate. She said Ethan is dead, and no one will investigate. Who made the report? Richard's assistant. Are you really pregnant? She shook her head. Tears fell down. No. Do you have evidence? She hesitated. I said, Madison, you're not choosing who to betray now. You're choosing to spend a few years in prison. This was more effective than comforting. She slowly let go of me. Took out a recorder from her bag. I recorded once. Afraid they wouldn't give the money. I took the recorder. You're a bit smarter than I thought. She gave a wry laugh. I'm just greedy. Not trying to die. I handed the recorder to Daniel. 10 minutes later, the hearing continued. Daniel submitted Madison's recording that I end the recording. Richard's assistant clearly said, you just need to insist the child is Ethan's. Vivian will protect you. Once Olivia is ruled out, the money will be transferred. Madison stood up and admitted in court that she had falsified the pregnancy certificate. The press section erupted instantly. Vivian finally couldn't maintain her expression. Richard's face was terrifyingly grim. The judge announced that the fake divorce documents, the prenuptial agreement, and the pregnancy certificate all had significant disputes. The inheritance process for Ethan Walker was suspended. Related trust assets of the Walker family were temporarily frozen. The death certificate entered a review process. This wasn't the final victory, but it was enough. Their knives, one by one, were blocked by me. After the hearing, I walked out of the court. The reporters gathered around. I only said one thing. I told you, the ones who are afraid of questions should answer them. I got into the car. Ryan was driving. Daniel sat in the passenger seat. I sat in the back, looking out the window. Half an hour later, Daniel received a call. His expression slowly changed. After hanging up, he turned to look at me. The court just received an anonymous document. What document? Ethan's second will. I frowned. Second. The date is newer than the one you have. My heart sank. What does it say? Daniel's voice was low. It says he revokes all your inheritance rights. An instant of silence in the car. I looked at Daniel. Who submitted it? Daniel said, Ethan Walker himself. I didn't speak immediately. The city outside the car window was receding. The court had just frozen the Walker family trust. Madison had just admitted to a fake pregnancy. Vivian and Richard had just been backed into a corner. Then, a second will submitted by Ethan himself appeared, revoking all my inheritance rights. The timing was too perfect. Perfect enough to make it seem like someone had been waiting for this moment. Ryan spoke first. Impossible. Daniel didn't look at him, just at me. The document uses Ethan's private encrypted signature. The court cannot directly determine if it's forged for now. I asked, is the content complete? Yes. Date, 5 days before the explosion. I chuckled. 5 days before the explosion. He recorded a video asking me to inherit. 5 days before the explosion, he also wrote a will revoking my inheritance. Is Ethan schizoid? Daniel said. That's the problem. Ryan frowned. Or maybe they got his encrypted signature. Daniel nodded. Or Ethan was forced to sign some blank authorization. I looked at them. There's another possibility. Both turned to look at me. I said, this will is real. The car grew quieter. Ryan immediately said, Ethan wouldn't do that to you. I looked at him. Are you sure? He already used me as bait. Ryan was speechless. I didn't need anyone to vouch for Ethan. Promises and relationships were the least valuable. Files were valuable. Evidence was valuable. I took out my phone. To Walker Group. Daniel turned his head. Now, the board is holding an emergency meeting. Better, Ryan said. They won't let you in. I put on the ring, then let them block the legal wife in the frame. The Walker Group building is in the city center. The glass facade is like a knife standing upright. When I arrived, the media was already downstairs. The news of the hearing spread quickly. Vivian and Richard hadn't had time to completely block it. I walked into the lobby. The receptionist saw me and changed his expression. Ms. Reed, you don't have an appointment. Tell the floor above. Olivia Reed is here. The board meeting is in progress. You can't. I walked straight to the elevator. Security came to block me. Ryan stepped forward, blocking my path. Daniel pulled out the temporary court order. The assets of the Walker Family Trust have been frozen during the equity dispute over Ethan Walker. Any board resolution involving a change in the group's control must be notified to Olivia Reed. The receptionist froze. The security guard didn't dare move. I walked into the elevator. Before the elevator door closed, I saw several reporters followed in. Good. That's exactly the camera I wanted. The conference room was on the top floor. 6 security guards stood outside the door. Richard's assistant saw me, and his expression turned ugly instantly. You can't come in. I asked. Is Richard inside? The board doesn't welcome outsiders. I raised my hand to knock. No one opened it. I directly said to Ryan, open it. Ryan glanced at Daniel. Daniel didn't stop him. Ryan stepped forward, kicked open the conference room door. The door hit the wall with a loud bang. Everyone in the conference room looked over. The long table was filled with directors. Vivian sat next to the head. Richard was standing in front of the screen. The screen displayed a line of text. Resolution to initiate emergency succession management program. They were indeed fighting for control. Richard saw me, and there was no surprise on his face, as if he had expected me to come. Olivia, you're getting less and less cultured. I walked in. You're getting more and more like a criminal. The board members' expressions changed. Vivian said coldly, call security. I placed the court ruling on the table. Under the court's freeze order, you're holding a meeting to determine control. And you're sure you want security to kick me out? No one moved. I pulled out a chair and sat down. Continue. I want to hear how a dead man can personally submit a second will. Richard looked at Daniel. Lawyer Stone, you should know that the second will has already been submitted to the court. Olivia Reed doesn't have the right to be here. Daniel said calmly. The authenticity of the second will has not been confirmed. Richard chuckled. He pressed the remote. The screen switched. A document was projected. It had Ethan's electronic signature. There was also a video certification. In the frame, Ethan sat at his desk. He said, I, Ethan Walker, revoke all previous will arrangements. Olivia Reed is no longer my heir. His voice was clear. His face was clear. A deathly silence filled the conference room. I stared at the screen. It was Ethan. At least it looked like him. His expression was cold. His voice was steady. No signs of coercion. Viv. Ian looked at me, her eyes filled with the satisfaction of regaining control of the situation. Is there anything else you want to say? I didn't answer. I had Daniel rewind. The video replayed. I watched Ethan on the screen. First time, I looked at his face. Second time, I listened to his voice. Third time, I examined the background. Then I said, stop. The image froze at the moment Ethan said the name Olivia Reed. I stood up and walked to the screen. This video is fake. Richard sneered. You can't accept the reality. No. I pointed at the screen. It's fake. Evidence. Ethan doesn't have a wedding ring mark on his left hand. The conference room fell silent. That I continued. Ethan hasn't taken off his wedding ring in 3 years. He wears it even in the shower. In the actual video recorded for me, he has a ring on his left hand. And there are ring marks. But in this video, there's no ring on his hand. Not even any ring marks. Richard's expression changed slightly. I continued pointing at the screen. Second, the background is wrong. Ethan's study clock is in the left rear, not the right rear. This is a false scene after mirror processing. Daniel immediately walked over to look. I said, third. He called me Olivia Reed. Vivian impatiently said, that's your name. Ethan never calls me that. I looked at all the directors. He only writes my full name in legal documents. When privately recording videos, he calls me Liv. I stared at Richard. The forger knows my official name, but doesn't know how he calls me. Richard didn't speak. Daniel had already copied the video. I will apply for technical expertise. Richard put away the remote. Until the results of the expertise are out, this will remains a valid will. Wrong, that I said. Until the identification results come out, it's still controversial. Vivian suddenly stood up. Enough. What gives you the right to be sitting here? You're not from the Walker family. You don't have children. No blood ties. No standing. I looked at her. Your son gave me 37 of the voting power. That depends on whether the will is valid. Even if the will is invalid, I am still a party in the legitimate dispute. The court has already put the proceedings on hold. Richard interjected. The board can't shut down because of your personal matters. I nodded. Of course not. So let's talk about business. I projected the account statements Ryan found onto the screen. Walker Medical Fund. Over the past 18 months. Transferred $2,600,000,000 through 3 shell companies. The final account is linked to Richard Walker. The directors exploded. A senior director stood up. Richard, what is this? Richard said coldly. Falsified materials. I turned to the next page. These payments are disguised as overseas medical equipment purchases, but the corresponding company has no employees, no warehouse, no real business. Daniel added. We have submitted the materials to the Financial Crime Investigation Department. Richard stared at Daniel. You have betrayed the Walker family. Daniel said. I serve Ethan Walker, not you. This made the room colder. I continued to release photos. 2 days before the yacht explosion. Richard's people boarded the boat. On the day of the explosion, the maintenance records were altered. An hour before the explosion, the fuel system pressure was abnormal. All the evidence was pressed one by one. Richard's expression remained steady, but Vivian's face grew paler and paler. She was more afraid than Richard, because she knew more. I looked at her. Vivian, why didn't you ask if Ethan might still be alive? She looked at me sharply. Everyone in the room was silent. That I said slowly. A normal mother hearing there might be a problem with a death certificate should first react by confirming if her son is still alive. I approached her. But you didn't. Vivian's lips were pressed tightly together. Because you know, he didn't die that easily. Or, you're afraid he might actually be alive. Richard whispered. Olivia, watch what you say. I didn't look at him. I just stared at Vivian. Where were you that day the explosion happened? She sneered. I have no obligation to answer you. You were at the manor. I said. You didn't go to the dock. You didn't go to the hospital, and you didn't go to the scene. Because 10 minutes before the explosion, you received a message. I held up a record. Vivian's private number received a text message. The content had been deleted, but the time existed. The sender was Richard's assistant. Vivian's face finally changed. I continued. After receiving the message, you didn't call the police. You didn't call Ethan. You had the kitchen prepare dinner. 15 minutes later, the news about the explosion came out. And then you started performing your breakdown. Vivian slammed the table hard. You bitch. I chuckled. That's more like it. Suddenly, the conference room door was pushed open. 2 investigators walked in. Richard Walker. We need your cooperation in the investigation. Richard's assistant's face turned deathly pale, but Richard was still smiling. He straightened his cuffs. I will cooperate. He paused when he walked beside me. He whispered. Do you think Ethan is a victim? I looked at him. Richard leaned in closer. He's the one who deceived you the most. Then he was taken away. Vivian sat back down in her chair, as if she had aged 10 years overnight. But I knew she wasn't done. The real danger wouldn't fall in the first round. The board of directors was forced to pause. The court's injunction was expanded. The group's control was temporarily cannot be transferred. When I walked out of the building, reporters swarmed me. They asked if I had murder evidence, if Ethan was still alive, if I would take over the Walker Group. I didn't answer any of their questions. That I only said, Richard Walker was taken away. It's not the end. It's the beginning. After getting into the car, I finally felt tired. Not physically tired. It was a hollow feeling in my heart. I won today, but Richard's words were like a venomous needle. Ethan was the one who deceived me the most. I took out the ring. The small letters on the inside were still there. Don't believe the death certificate. Sudden. LY. I realized something. This might not be a warning. Maybe it's manipulation. He engraved a sentence in the ring, guiding me in his direction. The more I resist Vivian, the closer I get to his plan. But what about my own plan? Am I fighting for myself? Or am I completing Ethan's chess game? That night, Daniel sent the preliminary technical results. The second will video is highly suspected of being a deepfake, but the electronic signature is real. This means someone has obtained Ethan's highest authorization key. There are no more than 3 people in the world who can get this key. Ethan himself, Daniel, and Vivian. I put down my phone. That a knock came from outside the door. Ryan immediately drew his gun. I signaled him not to move. The knocking was soft. 3 times. A pause. Then 2 more. Ryan's expression changed. This is Ethan's code, he said. My heart skipped a beat. From outside, a hoarse voice spoke. Liv, it's me. I stood my ground, unmoving. Ryan looked at me, waiting for my decision. I slowly walked to the door. Through the door, I said, Ethan, if you come in, I won't hug you. There was a silence outside for a few seconds. Then he said, I know. I opened the door. Ethan Walker stood outside. He had lost a lot of weight. There were faint, lighter scars from burns on half his face. His hair was shorter. His eyes were still the same eyes, but they no longer held the same cleanliness as before. He looked at me. Liv. I raised my hand and slapped him, harder than the one I gave Ryan. Ethan turned his head. Not dodging. I looked at him. This is for my deceased husband. I slapped him again. This is for the me you used as bait. Ryan lowered his head. Daniel appeared from the other side of the corridor. obviously arranged by him as well. I looked at the three of them. Good. Everyone's here. I turned and walked back into the room. Now, whoever dares to hide another word, I'll send all of you to the media. Ethan walked in. The door closed. The first thing he said wasn't an explanation, but, Vivian isn't the final mastermind. I stared at him. Then who is? Ethan looked at me. His voice low. There's one more person on the board. Ethan sat opposite me. I didn't offer him water. He looked weak, but that wasn't my problem. A man who could arrange his own fake death should have also arranged for his wife to judge him. Ryan stood by the window. Daniel stood at the door. They were all silent. I looked at Ethan. What's your name? Ethan said, Charles Grant. I remembered this person, one of the oldest directors at Walker Group. He was already on the board during Ethan's father's lifetime. He rarely spoke and looked like an old man who was only concerned with dividends. Such people were the easiest to be ignored, and the most dangerous. I asked, what did he do? Ethan's voice was hoarse. The money Richard transferred. He didn't keep it for himself. He was just a conduit. The money ultimately went into the fund controlled by Charles. Does Vivian know? Knows part of it. Madison. She's just a tool. I sneered. You sure know how to categorize everyone. Ethan looked at me. Liv, I know you hate me. Don't call me Liv. He paused. I said, now you can only call me Olivia. His gaze darkened. Olivia. I continued asking, why didn't you tell me? This time. He didn't answer immediately. That I watched his silence, and the last bit of tenderness in my heart turned cold. You still want to find a nice way to say it. Ethan whispered. I'm afraid you'll die. Wrong answer. He looked up. I said, they already want to kill me. Your concealment hasn't made me safe. Just ignorant. Ethan's hand tightened slowly. I thought as long as they believed you were eliminated, they wouldn't move against you immediately. And what happened? I was wrong. I stared at him. Where were you wrong? He looked at me, and after a long time, said, I thought of you as someone who needed protection, rather than someone who could stand beside me to handle the truth. That finally sounded like a human word, but it wasn't enough. There's more. Ethan's Adam's apple moved. I used you. The room fell silent. Ryan looked out the window. Daniel lowered his eyes. I nodded. Continue. I knew once you discovered the fake divorce, you would investigate further. You wouldn't accept being erased. You would force Vivian and Richard to act. You'll make them reveal their weaknesses. I chuckled. So you're dead, and I'm living to take your place in the fight. Ethan's face turned paler. Yes. As soon as the word left his lips, I wasn't angry anymore, because the truth was cleaner than any excuse. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside was the city night. I once thought marrying Ethan meant entering a safer world. Later, I learned that the higher the building, the colder the wind. I turned to look at him. From now on, your plan ends. Mine begins. Ethan nodded. All right. First, you cannot appear in public. Ryan froze. Ethan looked at me too. I said, Charles and Vivian don't know you've already met me. This advantage can't be wasted. Daniel asked, what do you plan to do? Well, hold a board meeting tomorrow. Ethan frowned. Too soon. They'll think him rushing for control. Vivian will counterattack. Charles will pretend to be neutral. We need him to stand up on his own. Ethan looked at me. That gaze was very familiar. He is getting to know me again. Good. He should have won this earlier. Second, I continued. Ethan handed over all the real authorization documents to me. Daniel looked up. All. Ethan didn't hesitate. Okay. Third, Daniel, submit the video authentication results of the second will on the spot. But don't mention the source of the electronic signature immediately. Daniel understood. Pressure the one holding the key to move. Right. I looked at Ethan. Fourth, you write a statement, not a resurrection statement. An authorization statement. Only for the court and the investigation department, not the media. Ethan nodded. Fifth, I said, if the situation gets out of control, you can appear, but not to save me, to testify. Ethan whispered. I understand. I looked at him. You better really understand. 9 o'clock in the morning the next day, the Walker Group held another emergency board meeting. This time, it was called by me. All the directors were there. Vivian was also there. Her complexion was poor, but her makeup was still perfect. Charles Grant sat at the far end of the long table. White hair, gray suit, a pair of gold-rimmed glasses placed beside him. He looked harmless, even a bit tired. As I entered the meeting room, he nodded at me. Ms. Reed, I'm very sorry for what happened. I looked at him. Regret is usually for the dead. It's still early. His expression paused. Vivian said coldly, you called the board meeting. What do you want to perform? I sat down. Not a performance, a reckoning. The meeting room door closed. Daniel began to state his case. He submitted the technical expertise of the second will video. The results were clear. The video had facial synthesis traces. The voice sample had splicing. The background layer had mirror arrow. That is to say, the second will video is fake. The director's expressions grew increasingly grim. Vivian immediately said, that's impossible. I looked at her. Why are you so sure? She was speechless for a moment. Charles spoke slowly. Even if the video is problematic, the electronic signature is still valid. We can't ignore that. I looked at him. He finally spoke. You're right. I said, so the question is, who can use Ethan's highest authorization key? Daniel projected the permission list. Ethan Walker, Daniel Stone, Vivian Walker. There was also a temporary restored permission record. Applicant for restoration. Charles Grant. A second of silence in the meeting room. Charles frowned. This is a normal director's permission restoration. The company needs to operate after Ethan's disappearance. I nodded. It sounds reasonable. I pressed the next page. Permission restoration time. 11:42 p.m. the night before the yacht explosion. I looked at Charles. Why did you restore Ethan's authorization key the night before the explosion? Charles' expression finally changed. I didn't, Daniel said. The application came from your private terminal. Charles' face turned cold. The terminal can be hacked. Of course, I said. So I checked the surveillance that night. The screen switched. In the footage, Charles' assistant entered the server management. The time and permission recovery time were only 3 minutes apart. Charles' fingers lightly tapped the desk. Very lightly. But I saw it. He was suppressing his anger. Vivian stood up. This has nothing to do with me. I looked at her. I haven't said that yet. She froze. I played another recording. The recording provided by Madison didn't just have Richard's assistant's voice. There was also Vivian's voice in the latter half. The child doesn't matter. What matters is making Olivia lose her identity. Once she's eliminated, Charles will handle the board. The recording ended. Everyone looked at Charles. Charles took off his glasses and slowly wiped them. The recording can be faked. I nodded. Yes. So there's also the transfer. Daniel released the fund path. Walker Medical Foundation. A shell company. Richard controls the account. It finally flows into the Grant Foundation. The amount is huge. The time span is 18 months. Charles no longer shows signs of fatigue. He sits straighter. His entire demeanor changes. Like an old knife that has been pulled out. Young people always think that seeing a few transfer state means they understand the war. I look at him. Old people always think that speaking slowly makes them seem innocent. Several directors lower their heads, not daring to look. Charles sneers. Olivia Reed. You don't have the qualifications to manage the Walker Group. You are just a mistake that Ethan brought home. I say, this mistake just froze your money yesterday. Charles' face darkens. Vivian suddenly says, Charles. Enough. I look at her. She is scared. She is not scared of me. She is scared that Charles will pull her down with him. But Charles no longer listens to her. Vivian, do you want to pretend to be clean now? Who said back then that Olivia had to be kicked out of the inheritance chain? Vivian's face turns deathly pale. The conference room falls completely silent. I don't intervene, let them fight it out. It's more effective than my asking. Charles continued to say, who gave me her sister's information? Who made Madison fake her pregnancy? Who said Ethan was too much like his father and wouldn't listen? Vivian shouted. It was you who wanted to kill Ethan. The moment she said this, the air in the conference room seemed to be sucked out. Charles looked at her and smiled. I was just correcting a mistake. Footsteps were heard outside the door. Investigators pushed the door open. Daniel had already arranged for a synchronized recording and live stream to be sent to the court's AUT. Porized port. Charles and Vivian's recent conversation has already spread. Vivian tried to stand up but stumbled. Charles remained seated. He looked at me. Do you think you won? I said, no, I've just begun. The investigators approached him. Charles suddenly said, is Ethan alive? Then everyone looked at me. I didn't answer. Charles laughed. Tell him. His father also thought he won back then. What happened? He died in bed. Didn't even get a chance to change his will. My chest tightened. Ethan's father. There were old cases after all. But now wasn't the time to that. Charles was taken away. Vivian was taken away too. As she passed by me, she suddenly stopped. She looked at me. Her eyes devoid of regret. Only hatred. You ruined my family. I looked at her. No, you treated the family like a company. The son like an asset. And me like an obstacle. The one who ruined it was you. Vivian's lips trembled. Ethan will regret choosing you. I said, he already regrets it. But not because he chose me. She was taken away. Only the directors and silence remained in the meeting room. I walked to the main seat. Richard was being investigated. Charles was taken away. Vivian was taken away. Madison testified. The second will was disproven. Ethan's real authorization documents were in my hands. Daniel read the court's temporary authorization. During the review of Ethan Walker's death certificate, and until the related inheritance and equity disputes are resolved, Olivia Reed will act as Ethan Walker's designated authorized representative, temporarily exercising his 37 voting power. A director stood up. I object. She has no management experience. I looked at him. You can object. Then explain why you approved Richard's abnormal payments in the past 3 years. He sat down. Another director said, the group needs stability. Stability doesn't mean continuing to play dumb. I opened the file. First, suspend all payments related to the Grant Foundation. Second, initiate an internal audit. Third, cooperate with the investigation department to retrieve the medical fund, overseas procurement, and trust transfer records of the past 5 years. Fourth, reorganize the risk committee. No one spoke. I scanned them. Starting today, the Walker Group will no longer operate by surname. It will operate by signed responsibility. Whoever signed Explains. The conference room fell silent. Daniel placed the document in front of me. I signed my name. Olivia Reed, not Olivia Walker. I kept the Reed because the person sitting here today was myself, not someone's wife, not someone's widow. In the afternoon, the court officially announced the expansion of the investigation. The police re-examined Ethan's death certificate. Madison became a witness against the state. Sophia was deferred prosecution for cooperating with the investigation. Richard began to crack under interrogation. Charles' fund was frozen. Vivian's private account was seized. News filled the internet. The Walker inheritance case takes a shocking turn. Behind the fake divorce, fake pregnancy, and fake will, there are suspicions of murder. Olivia Reed temporarily takes over key voting rights of the Walker group. Late at night, I returned to the safe house. Ethan was waiting for me. He stood up, looking at me. I saw what? The board. I took off my coat. Then you should understand one thing. What? I'm not a variable in your plan. Ethan nodded. You are the plan itself. I looked at him coldly. Don't say nice things. He lowered his eyes. I'm sorry. The room fell silent. Those 3 words came too late. Too late to solve any problem. I sat down, looking at him. Your father's death. Charles was involved too. Ethan's gaze darkened. I suspected, but there was no evidence. Now you have a chance to investigate. Yes. What are you going to do? He looked at me. Follow your lead. I smiled. Finally learned. Ethan took a step closer. Olivia, I know I don't deserve to ask for your forgiveness. You don't. He paused. I continued. You can apologize. You can compensate. You can give up your shares. You can testify. But you can't treat these as chips for trading forgiveness. I know. You don't know. I looked at him. You're used to being in control. You're used to arranging things in advance. You even have to plan your loved ones. You think as long as the result is protection. The process can be deceptive. Ethan's face was very pale. I continued. But marriage isn't your company. Your wife isn't your asset. You don't have the power to decide whether I can bear the truth for me. He whispered. I was wrong. Wrong. Then change. It's not just that. I took out a document and placed it on the table. Ethan glanced at it. A share transfer agreement. He froze. I said, you previously promised to transfer all your private shares to me. Now sign. Ryan and Daniel both looked over. Ethan didn't ask why. He picked up the pen and signed. Quickly, without hesitation. I took back the document. Starting today, the part of Walker Group that belongs to you will be under my control. Ethan looked at me. Okay, Anne. I said, we're separating. His fingers twitched slightly. How long? Until I decide. Will you still give me a chance? I looked at him. This was the first time he asked. Not arrangement, not protection, not command, just asking. I said, let's see. There was pain in Ethan's eyes, and a faint glimmer of hope too. I didn't comfort him. He needed the pain. People don't change without it. 3 days later, Ethan formally submitted a living declaration to the court and the investigation department. Not a public media statement, only for overturning the death certificate, confirming the attempted murder, and authorizing the authenticity. The police immediately upgraded the case. Richard, to lessen his own blame, confessed that Charles had instructed the yacht explosion. Vivian was involved in forging the divorce documents, premarital agreement fraud, and the fake pregnancy arrangement. She insists she didn't know the specific plans for the explosion, but Madison's recording and Charles' conversation proves she at least knew Ethan would be taken care of. Sophia came to see me. She sat opposite me, crying heavily. Olivia, I'm sorry, she said. I looked at her. This sister, I had once paid her debts, found her a job, and cleaned up her messes time and again. She wasn't the biggest villain, but she wasn't innocent either. I said, I won't beg for you. Her face paled. I continued, but if you cooperate with the investigation, I won't pursue civil compensation. She nodded, crying. Thank you. Don't thank me. I said, this is the last bit of dignity I give you. From now on, you're responsible for your own life. After she left, I didn't grieve for long. One must learn to cut off relationships that drain them. Family shouldn't be venerated if it only drinks blood. A month later, Walker Group held a formal press conference. For the first time, I appeared as the group's temporary chairman. Below, the audience was filled with reporters. Flashes fell like rain. Someone asked, Mrs. Reed, have you confirmed that Ethan Walker is still alive? I said, relevant information will be released by the investigation department. Today, I only discuss group governance. Someone asked, are you managing the group as Ethan's wife? I looked at the reporter. I am managing the group as a legally authorized representative and the holder of the largest voting power. Then does your marriage to Ethan still exist? I paused for a second. Legally, it exists. Emotionally, it is being re-evaluated. A moment of silence followed below. I continued. The focus today is not on my marriage. The focus is on how a family-owned business uses to cover up crimes, trusts to cover up transfers, and marriage documents to erase a person's identity. I opened the file. The Walker Group will fully cooperate with the investigation, disclose the audit results for the past 5 years, and establish an independent board review mechanism. No one, including members of the Walker family, will be above the rules. The reporter asked, will you sue Vivian Walker? Yes, she is your husband's mother. She was also the one who forged my divorce documents. This answer silenced the room. I didn't avoid it. I don't need to perform tolerance in public. Many women are taught to be magnanimous. Magnanimity is sometimes just a way to lessen the punishment for the wicked. After the press conference, I walked off the stage. Daniel handed me a file. The court confirms the fake divorce is invalid. I took it. It was clearly written on the paper. My divorce registration with Ethan Walker was invalid. The marriage relationship continued. I stared at it for a long time. This paper was supposed to make me breathe a sigh of relief. But it didn't. Because a marriage isn't restored to its original state just by a court ruling. Identity can be reclaimed. Trust cannot. Ethan was waiting at the end of the corridor. He wore a dark coat. The burn marks still visible. The reporters didn't get a shot of him. He couldn't fully appear in public yet. He saw the file in my hand. The result is out. We're still married. I looked at him. Legally. He gave a wry smile. I noted I put the file away. They'll move out of the safe house next week. You're staying in the apartment in the North District. I'm staying in the original beach cabin. Ethan looked at me. That's what I left for you. It's Min. Now. He nodded. Okay. He paused for a few seconds, then said, "Can I see you? Make an appointment in advance." Ryan almost coughed next to me, but Ethan nodded seriously. Okay. I turned to leave. Ethan called after me. Olivia. I stopped. He said, "I'll chase you again." I didn't turn back. Then you'd better learn one thing. What? Stop thinking you know what I want. I walked out of the building. It was very cold outside, but the sun was bright. Reporters gathered around again. Someone handed a microphone to me. Ms. Reed. Are you now considered the widow of Ethan Walker, or the new head of the Walker family? I looked at the camera. This is a silly question, but it's perfect for a conclusion. I said, I'm not his widow. I'm not part of the Walker family either. I'm Olivia Reed. I'm the one they tried to erase. But who ended up back at the table myself. Starting today, whoever owes me, I'll collect one by one. The camera lights turned on. I walked down the steps. Behind me was the Walker Group building. The people there once thought that changing a document could change my life. They were wrong. They stole my marriage. I took back my identity. They stole my inheritance. I took my shares. They wanted to use death to shut me up. I pulled the dead out of their graves to testify. They thought I was the wife who was dealt with in the story. But in the end, I became the one who judged them.